Hello, everyone, and welcome to this video podcast with Philip Rieks. I've got Philip here today, and we're going to talk about testing predominantly and testing Spring applications. Hi, Philip. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And maybe we could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into software development and a bit about your career so far.
Sure. So I'm Philip. I'm located in Germany. Started developing with Java also as my first programming language is like almost 10 years ago in university. I did special programs. So in Germany, we have a so-called duales Studium. It's a dual study where you make a bachelor and then also when others have vacation, you do apprenticeship at a company. So I studied business information technology, like 50% business and 50% IT. Used Java ever since at university and have stick to Java like for the last 10 years and yeah, using it on a daily basis.
Fantastic. So I know you from LinkedIn and posting a lot of really interesting information about testing, specifically with Spring and Spring Boot. Um, that seems to be your niche. Is that something that you made a conscious decision for, and where did that come from?
Yeah, it's somehow like it grew naturally, I would say. So when I started as a greenhorn developer after my studies, like junior developer, joining a team, you're really overwhelmed by all the technologies because like the framework back then we used Java EE. I wasn't taught at university, so I had to learn all the concepts, and for most parts, I didn't find very good like learning tutorials online. So I started to blog about the things that I wish had been existing in the internet. So I blogged about CDI, context and dependency injection, because like dependency injection as a new developer is like, for me at least, it was super complicated. Yeah. Whenever I had some parts to write about, I blogged about it. And over the time, so I like framed my blog enterprise development with Java made simple. Over the time that came to testing Java applications made simple. And some years ago, I doubled down on testing Spring Boot application made simple because like with the testing domain, I guess there is quite little information on the internet compared to fancy features like GraphQL or Kafka. So I saw that this niche isn't very well represented and started to write about it more and more, and yeah, evolved into this niche.
And is that something that you would like advise others who are starting out in a career? You seem to double your own learning by not only learning these new concepts but by writing about them. Like personally, I find the act of writing something down clarifying in my own head because I'm having to like check my own assumptions. Is that something that you find as well?
Yeah, that's for sure. And what I learned, if you're able to explain a concept to someone that has no clue about it, like this, you're the top of the iceberg when it comes to knowledge. So for sure, you have to apply the knowledge. Can't be a theoretical like ivory tower knowledge keeper. But if you're able to transfer this information with small snippets and content, this also helps you as a developer or person in general.
Yeah, and I feel like you've sounds like you've specialized from all of enterprise development to testing, but then to specifically Spring testing. And I don't think that is like difficult at all because often when I find myself going into more and more niche topics, I find that even at that niche, there's just so many things to cover that I never seem to find a problem in finding enough things to discuss. And I think testing is as varied as software development as a whole. Every single different software development topic has an associated branch that has to be mirrored in the testing world.
Exactly, exactly. And for me, at least, it feels like that. I mean, it's somehow like for many teams still an afterthought, automated testing. So in their team agreements, they all agree like we need X% test coverage, we need solid testing. Product says, yes, please have testing. And and then in the daily, in the stand-ups, developers report, feature is done, but I still have to test it. So yeah, for me, that's not done. I mean, testing belongs to the implementation. And yeah, so it's like for many teams, an afterthought, like love-hate relationship. So they know that they have to do it. And like with their last energy after implementing maybe a complex algorithm, they will add the test.
And do you think that is because there's a gap in knowledge? Because I feel like, people are taught unit testing at university, or when they go on boot camps, or when they're following through, tutorials that often have unit tests. But now we're much more in a world of microservices and distributed systems, and those are, definitely, non-trivial cases. And there is a whole heap of tools out there that make this easy. But if you don't know about them, it's difficult, right?
Yeah, that's true. So it usually starts testing like you test your calculator class. So you implement like add and subtract function, and this is super nice in theory. You can do TDD, and yeah, but then you join projects, have real world use cases, databases, network calls, message queues, OAuth 2. You're quite fast. It gets complicated, and if you're new, you first have to learn the framework, the tools, database, and there is almost no time left for learning to test and how to test. And I like to compare it to toolbox. So especially with Java, this toolbox of tools is mature and rich. You just have to know when to use which tool, when to use a hammer, the chainsaw, or anything that is there, and then apply it to your testing needs. And that's what I try to bring to the community.
And maybe I could just put you on a spot a little bit and say, what are some of the tools that you use maybe for testing databases, queues, distributed systems, some of the harder things?
Yeah. So the tool that really changed integration testing with Java is test containers. So ever since it came out some years ago, I try to convey or convince every client to use it or in all the projects, because this test containers tool lets us use like Docker containers for testing purposes. It manages the lifecycle. And also the adoption seems to be quite good. So I'm doing regularly talks and also workshops. And this year in my workshop, I asked 20 people in my workshop for Spring Boot testing who's using test containers, and like were raising, all hands were up. So like 3 to 4 years ago, you still had the issues in at least big enterprises. Docker, are we allowed to use it? Not on developer machines, on Jenkins, root access. So this seems to be solved for many corporations now, and at least on that end, there's good adoption to get as close to production as possible, because there are also many in-memory things you can use, in-memory databases, in-memory embedded Kafka, but this won't mimic your production setup as close as possible.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? I'm trying to remember what I used before test containers. I guess like in-memory databases that we would spin up. Obviously, they're not going to be exactly the same as the databases that you would use in production. And obviously, there's going to be differences around local Postgres in test containers, but the majority of the types of failures that you're looking for will just be a lot easier to identify at that stage. And obviously, there's still other aspects of testing that you can do in, not in a local environment, but maybe in a pre-production environment where you're having more load against the system, or something like that. But the amount of bugs that we can find earlier in the cycle is just going to help everyone. Yeah, cool. So you mentioned test containers, and I've mentioned test containers before on other talks, and I really like test containers because when I do work with AWS, I can use Local Stack, which is another great open source project, to actually run AWS services, or mimics to AWS services in Docker containers locally as well. So being able to have a unit test that not only hits a database, but also something like an S3 service. I mean, it's just fantastic. I don't know if you've tried Local Stack at all.
Yeah. So when you're using AWS as a cloud, really, this is also from developer experience a big plus. So I've also worked with the other big cloud providers. Sometimes there are emulators. For example, Google, I remember, I don't know, recall the service pops up. I guess there's an emulator. I've used it 2 or 3 years ago. Documentation was okayish, but then you have these niche utility things. And with local stack, you really have like now also a company behind this trying to make development and integration testing as smooth as possible.
Yeah, I feel like I don't think I've ever like hit a limit. I know there probably will be limits on what local stack can do, but the type of test that I want to do as an integration test, I've never really like hit a limit. Obviously, local stack isn't going to be able to mimic all the different IAM permissions and such like, but that isn't really what I'm wanting to test at that stage of my testing lifecycle. Is the data coming from S3 in the right format? Am I able to parse it correctly, pass it to the next system? Can I see that a database record is created and things like that? I mean, that alone is going to reduce my development cycle by so much instead of making resources in AWS and deploying something to a server somewhere or a container. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I know that as well as doing a lot of content, you actually have your own business.
Yes, so I'm founder of a company called Pragmatech. So our company goal is to help developers deliver software faster and with more confidence. And testing is one part of it. So all boils down to faster feedback loops and like developer experience. We all know projects, legacy projects with flaky tests where our CI build, almost reduces our joy in development because it fails so often and retrying it and you're stuck by technical issues. Whereas with nice and automated testing and automation, you can deploy to production much more faster. So that's in short what we are up for.
And do you find that when you're working with customers, there are people who are against or pushing back about investing time in testing, or uh, are people kind of understanding now that there are new ways of working and that they need to kind of jump on?
I haven't seen like a 10x developer that often that claims their implementation is perfect, so testing is a waste of time for them. So that's usually not the case. Um, I guess we all agree testing is important. We all do it to a degree when it comes to like perfectness, which is different between teams. So it's usually not the most difficult thing to convince that testing needs to be done. It's like transferring the knowledge, finding time, because always deadlines are the excuse for not writing valuable tests. So in a rush, the devs still write tests now with AI tools, with Cloud Code, with GitHub Copilot. They will or they use in the last 5 minutes Claude to generate the test and push it, build a screen, fine. SonarQube doesn't complain. We have 80% code coverage. Let's ship it. That's doable, but I guess on a long run, not the best way to do it.
Okay, interesting. And maybe you could, like, from your experiences, talk about some of the best teams. The best clients and the best customers that you've had. What are some of the practices that they hold high?
Yeah. So for the best, what I've seen is like using really trunk-based development. So everyone works on the main branch. There are no branches. We immediately deploy to production, meaning we need tooling for hiding features, which usually brings us to feature toggling so that we don't hold back development for ages. And then when trying to integrate, the developer is either on leave or we don't know what this was all about. So this was one of the practices. And going to this extreme, you also need decent testing because if you commit and push to the main branch and deploy to production, you should be sure that what you've changed is working and there is no regression. So this is usually the like my personal North Star, which I tell clients or customers, is on a Friday afternoon, you get an automated pull request from Dependabot or Renovate. It bumps Spring Boot from 3 to 4 to 3.5. So minor bump. Your pipeline is green. How confident are you to click squash and merge, go on vacation or holiday or like weekend, and yeah, be as confident that your pipeline is as good, your automation, that the thing will work. So you also need to invest in automation to roll back. So for sure, we are humans, errors will happen, but what's the process on rolling back, informing users, having like postmortems, run books when there's an incident, on call. So yeah, so there's really much to optimize for and to deliver software quite fast.
Yeah, so as well as having that quick release cycle, also having the metrics and the understanding of your application to say, we did a release, but these indicators are showing that there are a problem. And because these indicators are, alarming after X seconds, minutes, however long, we then can follow an automated return back to the previous version. Yeah, super, super slick.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
if the project or the software is as big that you can do also A/B deployments. I know that at AWS, for example, they don't roll out an S3 change worldwide. So maybe they start in a data center, availability zone, a region. So yeah, so that's also like really the tip of the iceberg if the project is that big. If not, you can also like roll out on a user base. You do beta users, you feature toggle it, only activate it then on Monday. So there are many tools and many features to yeah, push towards this North Star.
And when we're talking about like the best sort of teams, maybe like what sort of tools are they using that maybe other teams aren't using?
I guess from tooling, like as a developer, was quite usual in development environment. When it comes to the platform, those teams usually had then decent access to like, for example, Datadog or the CloudWatch metrics or tooling with Kibana. They had like in their repo written run books. So if they see an alert in a specific field, they had a checklist on what they could do. Because if you wake up in the middle of the night and have to fix an issue, you don't want to use your brain power to investigate. You want some steps to follow, some predefined queries. Look at this metric. How big is the user base? An automated escalation process. So mainly it is all about automation and yeah, structure and process.
Yeah, definitely. At 2 a.m, you want to be, doing the least amount of thinking and follow the the easiest path back to a good system. Definitely. And I noticed that as well as a lot of the content that you write, you've actually written a book as well.
Yes. So I've co-authored a book on Spring Boot and AWS called Stratospheric: From Zero to Production with AWS. Together with two other co-authors I met on Twitter. So we wrote the book together in an async fashion. Two
Wow.
authors were sitting in Germany and one, Tom, sitting in Australia. So also we had like time zone issues, but it worked out. We created a book and an online course within 2 years. And
Wow.
yeah,
That's fantastic. So even though we had was it like an 8 or 9 hour difference?
yeah.
So
So
how did that work out? How did the practicalities of setting a direction and I guess querying each other's opinions?
so we also the way we met was quite random. So there was on Twitter and someone invited for an informal get together of tech bloggers to exchange ideas, use WordPress, use this analytics tool. And within these calls, Tom and Björn also took part, and somehow they raised the idea, or Tom was it, I guess, to write a book on AWS because he was using it in his job and want to explore it. And Björn and me also at that time wanted to explore it more deeper because we were using it at work. And then we get together every 2 weeks at lunchtime in Germany, so 12, and Tom could then join after work at 8, so that worked out. At first, we developed a small prototype. We aligned on what to showcase because we really wanted from zero, from nothing to a fully automated deployment with GitHub Actions, the AWS CDK. So you write your infrastructure resources with Java. We integrate all the major AWS services into the Spring Boot project, showcase the amazing Spring Cloud AWS library. Yeah, split up the work. There are 3 big chapters, split up the work, and then did pull requests. We also wrote in Markdown because we were using LeanPub, where we can have this iterative approach of writing. So on LeanPub, you publish usually not the finished version of your book, but you have a progress bar and can tell the customer, hey, 30%, you can buy it for a reduced price. Buy it early, give us feedback, and we try to incorporate your feedback, and then you get the next update for free. So we did this. I don't know, we had 4 or 5 releases, like software, like agile.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
true
absolutely.
iterative approach. And yeah, this kept us motivated because if you from 0 to 500 pages with code examples, automation,
It's a huge amount of work.
it's huge.
Yeah. And also, I guess getting that feedback means that you can alter the direction or say, this is what people are interested in. We should focus on that more. I'm really interested in, the work that you did with, deploying Spring Boot to AWS. What are some of the things that you found, really helpful about Spring Cloud AWS, the library or the open source project? What sort of features did you find like most beneficial? Because I still don't know that everyone even understands that this project exists, or some of the benefits that it brings.
So one thing that's quite nice is like it became back an active open source project. So I guess the original maintainers, they somewhat left after some years of maintaining, and then a new person took over, Mache, and yeah, really push this project to latest Spring features. They are super fast to adopting new Spring Framework and Spring Boot versions, integrate nicely with all the Spring APIs. So, for example, SQS Listener, you have fully Spring messaging integration. Testing is excellent. So they also keep in mind that the application needs to be tested. So they invest some time into testing. They have, for example, a sliced context test annotation at SQS test, where you can test your annotation, your message listener in isolation, RDS support, S3 support, active on GitHub issues, helping out quite fast. So that really makes it really convenient to use it alongside Spring.
Yeah. So if you're writing your Spring Boot application and you want to integrate with SQS, which is the simple queue service, you don't necessarily even need to use the AWS SDK for SQS. You can continue to use like a Spring specific annotations and way of working as you would with, I don't know, ActiveMQ Listener or RabbitMQ Listener. So it can be a very similar way of working without having to, change your kind of style of programming. Is that right?
Yes. So you stay in the Spring abstractions. The messaging is a good example. You stay in there. You have Spring data, DynamoDB's RDS support. So yeah, you can stay in the realm of Spring. And for example, I guess with the AWS lower level SDK, you would have to write the message polling for your queue yourself, which is, I would say, not easy algorithm, when to poll, when to accept. So thanks to the library, you just need an annotation and your method gets flooded with incoming messages.
And maybe the reverse of that question, is there something you think that AWS or Spring Cloud AWS could do to help Java developers even more? Are there bits that you're finding difficult to test?
So the nice thing about AWS is, I guess, in the end, it's usually all just HTTP communicating with AWS. So like the abstraction in theory could be just, for example, wire mock or mock server. This is too low level to mock the calls because you don't want to do this. But you can easily point your application to local stack And then instead of communicating to AWS, it communicates to local stack for testing purposes. So in that sense, I guess it's doing great. Just thinking when it comes to the infrastructure, I remember that the old Spring Cloud AWS had quite some cloud formation support, which was recently. I'm also not that much up to date with the library, so I'm not sure. But usually developers they don't struggle with the implementation. They struggle with should I use Fargate, in which setting. There's Beanstalk, which is no longer used, and there's App Runner, okay, which it gets quite complex, and then you end up, I don't know, configuring a subnet and a CIDR IP address. As a dev, you just want to deploy your Docker
Yeah.
container, so it gets, yeah. And that's what we tried with Stratospheric, like an opinionated easy way forward. Maybe not the most optimized when it comes to cost savings, but you have something you can play around and then you can adopt.
Yeah. And, when I'm thinking of, testing myself, and I've been writing some example applications for some content of my own for YouTube. And I'm trying to, give a good view of testing and maybe look at some of the more like edge cases or more difficult things to test. And things like local stack help you on the happy path. But if you were trying to test that an AWS service, throttled a request, how would you go about testing something like that?
Yeah. So I had this once for a small pet project when my DynamoDB provisioned concurrency was like not optimal. And then I saw load testing could be a thing, but then you would need a deployed version of it, which costs money. If it's reasonable to argue and you have the capacity to do this, that's fine. What helps me in production, also AWS provides a service, there canary testing with CloudWatch. I mean, you don't need to use AWS. In the end, it's a cron triggered integration test or web test, so to say. So because also during runtime in production, you don't know if, I don't know, due to a service window in your RDS Postgres, the database doesn't boot, which shouldn't happen, but you can't catch this with an integration test because this just happens on Sunday afternoon because there you scheduled your maintenance window. And if your use case allows, you can have these scheduled every 10 or 15 minutes canaries, like with the analogy of the coal mining canaries that were put on top of coal workers, and then if the oxygen goes down, those birds die or at least make some big noise, and then they leave the coal mine. If you apply this to production, you can run user-like behavior and check it regularly. And then if you see, okay, my checkout process is like sending the email like after 5 minutes, something must be wrong with my throttling, then you can investigate. And hopefully you detect this more early than your customer. That's something I usually go for.
Yeah, I'm thinking with some of the new services like Bedrock. I think they do just generally have lower service limits because I guess the generative AI resources are more contested than maybe some of the other resources. So, I was thinking, I could probably imagine a scenario where this happens, and I want to test that, what would happen in my application? Would I retry, or would I try, to handle that within the application? Would I try and think of some other, workaround, or, display some other text instead of going to something like Bedrock? But I think that would be quite hard with something like local stack, because you almost want to tell local stack to behave in a like a an unhappy path. But maybe maybe that's a feature request I could request in. Please return the next request as as a throttle, and then as I retry, return as a success, and then at least I'm testing the retry capabilities of my application. Whereas I could imagine a situation where if I didn't have a retry, or if I hadn't thought about that testing scenario, it would never have got validated.
So thinking about it a bit longer, I know that with test containers, I don't know the name of the proxy, but there's a thing you can configure to, like chaos testing. You do things on the network layer and tell like this is slowing down, or this like DNS doesn't get resolved. So crazy things, chaos testing, which you can do.
Oh, amazing.
So
Yeah.
if we're not talking about AWS, but like an usual HTTP client that goes out to like stock exchange and fetches stock price by ticker, there for sure it's easy, because then you have like tools like Wiremock that emulate the remote service, and then you can tell them, hey, I want to test my retry mechanism, and then I go to another API, or I display a user, try again tomorrow, or render the HTML not with time leaf, I don't know, with something different. The fallback there it's possible, and I guess with AWS in the end it's HTTP communication, so must be doable.
Yeah, I feel like with non-cloud services, yeah, Wiremock would be a great way of doing it. With cloud services, local stack. But yeah, if we can put a proxy in between to say, add an additional latency, or I mean, that really opens up a lot of edge cases that would be very, very difficult to test in other ways, because um, it's all well and good checking that everything works, but you'll have a lot of code that is never going to have coverage if you only test the happy path. And really, having assurance or coverage of validating that your error cases are working as well would be cool. I will have to check that out and get back to you. Maybe I can write some tests and show them to you, and we can discuss like advantages and disadvantages of this style of testing. Yeah, and I guess in general, have you found like any particular cloud services to be easier or harder? I actually only know local stack for AWS. Is there a similar offering for other vendors?
I don't know. So I am using from time to time Azure and Google Cloud. For Google Cloud, sometimes these mentioned emulators, where Google says for the service we have an emulator Docker image. Maybe there is something, but I guess that's on the cloud developer side to invest into developer experience. And the experience is not only documentation, but also like testing it. And yeah, if there is no abstraction like JWC, that you can just replace the database with a real MS SQL or an Oracle, I don't know, then it might get complicated. And therefore, for example, for queuing, if there's no JMS abstraction, maybe it's getting complicated.
Yeah, interesting. So, at the beginning of this interview, we were talking about, junior developers and starting out. And maybe, what would you say to junior developers who are kind of under the pressure and feeling the pressure of being good enough and hitting those targets, and having testing as a thing that they see other people kind of put to the back of their mind? Do you have any advice for them?
So I also, when doing back then coding interviews with people for hiring purposes, usually the junior developers never had any testing experience. So maybe as a hint, like if I would be junior, you can really stand out from the rest of the juniors. I mean, the company knows that you're out of university, but if you can at least show that you know the tools, you know that's important, you have used it, JUnit, Mockito, and the tools for some things, and understand it, then I guess you also have a big plus. So it's also to stand out. And in the end, it's something to be learned. So really invest some time. It may be a bit or cumbersome at the beginning, because you first have to get used to the domain of the project, to the framework, to the specialities of the team. So maybe it's not prior one, but once you're feeling confident with the tooling, your IDE and Java in general, I would put testing even above AI prompting to use it, because from time to time you will see, if you also then do TDD, so test-driven development, it's super convenient because you can quickly try out things. You have to write the test anyway, so why not write them first and restructure how you implement it? You have to change your mind, because we as developers usually we have a solution in our mind and jump into the IDE and write it down, and then testing. Oh, my class! I have implemented a God class with like 100 lines, so I'm testing. Then testing doesn't make fun for sure. But if you start with the testing in mind or have it not as an afterthought. I have to do it anyway. So this can help to restructure the way you implement, split it out, make smaller functions, also makes it way more maintainable in the future.
Yeah, I found TDD really interesting in the middle of my career. I was lucky enough to have a very very knowledgeable mentor who could help me learning TDD, and I feel like it is very much a like a senior process, because I think as a junior, it's very difficult to know enough about how to build systems, how to use all the different building blocks that we have available. Um, and if you try and tell someone to do like the hardest thing first, even though it may appear easy to me, I find that people kind of get worried and anxious. But as people are growing in their career or building on top of existing systems as well, I think if you have an existing system and there are already tests available and people have made a testing approach, I feel like it's a lot easier to add a new feature by doing a TDD style of development. If you can't identify where the feature should go, maybe you shouldn't be you know changing code. Identify where the feature lives within the application, which test do I need to change, or tests more likely or not that it's more than one. And then you can be specific about your code changes, right? Because you make a change, you run the test, and does it pass or not? It's a lot more, green or red, right? It's very easy to say have I finished or not. Whereas I think back at my early career, and struggling to know if I've finished the work or not, or knowing if I've completed it to a high enough standard. Yeah. But I think it's quite an advanced topic, and if you are trying to improve your skills, I think TDD is a fantastic
Yeah.
mechanism, and I also really liked it when I'm doing pair programming with TDD as well, and understanding different people's perspective as well at the same time.
Yeah, that's also super nice to onboard people. So doing pair programming and then TDD, because like a senior developer can really convey much implicit knowledge about the team and shortcuts in the IDE. So it's super exhausting if you do it for too long. But if you block 2 to 3 hours with some regular breaks, you cool thing is we did it in COVID times back then, like ping pong TDD. So pair programming, driver, navigator, and one was implementing the test and the other one implementing the code. And then step
Oh,
by step,
interesting.
we evolved the implementation. So for sure, the feature needs to be in a way that this can be done. So if you deadline is always the excuse, so it can't be an excuse. That's super nice to help onboard new team members, because then can like we write the test in this way. Variable names should be this, and okay, I see where you struggle. Look at these resources instead of like here, take this task and come back next week. I want tests and the feature ready. That's super hard for newcomers.
Brilliant. And maybe just to kind of close out on, where do you see Pragmatech going in the future? What are you thinking about for the future of Spring testing?
To so with Spring and Spring Boot specifically in the Java ecosystem, so what I've seen as a developer was like Java EE and Jakarta EE. Haven't worked much with Quarkus and Micronaut. I know that they're doing better on the testing than, for example, Java EE. But with Spring and Spring Boot, like testing is super simple. You just need to know the how. So how to structure your classes, your controller. Spring provides so many test abstractions and so many well written code for testing, but really the knowledge is sometimes lost or people work against it. So usually my number one hidden gem is like this Spring test context caching. So when working with an application and integration test, you start an application context, you start many, and Spring is able to cache those. So if you structure your tests in the correct way, your build will be super fast. So I've optimized big Java projects with Spring Boot from 25 minutes to 12 minutes in build time, just by solely focusing on this feature. So really the vision for us is like to make sure testing is no longer an afterthought, and ship with confidence and as fast as possible by, as one example, transferring as much knowledge about testing Java and Spring Boot applications to the developers out there.
That's brilliant and really cool kind of goal and aim for the business. So I, for one, will be watching everything that you get up to, and look forward to hearing about it more. Thank you very much for joining me today. And if you've been watching this session and you really enjoyed the content and you feel like you're getting something from it, please give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. So thank you very much. Thanks again, and see you later.
Thanks for having me. Bye.